It's now 21 minutes after 7 and welcome to our week in review on the 13th of October 2017, just 12 days to the scheduled 26th presidential polls. Will the election take place? This is the million-dollar question that legal minds are battling with. It is also the day that the showdown is looming between NASA supporters and the police after the government banned street protests in Nairobi, Mombasa and Kisumu, citing insecurity concerns and destruction of property. Well, it has been a politically charged week, with NASA leaders sustaining their pressure on the IEBC to implement its irreducible minimums. But the big story this week has been Raila Odinga's withdrawal from the presidential race. Still this week, the High Court ruled that Third Way Alliance presidential candidate Ekuru Aukot be included in the repeat election. And just yesterday, the Senate passed the controversial election law amendments bill that now awaits the presidential assent. In this segment, we digest these and other stories that have made headlines throughout the week. And in studio, I would like to introduce two lawyers that we have this morning. And to my immediate left, we have James Mamboleo. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have Dr. Alutalala Mohwana. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. And we'd like to start off with what is expected to be a showdown this today, being Friday. Some have called it Machozi Friday. Others have said it's Shisha Friday. And this is because of the confrontation between the police and protesters. Now, it is within the constitutional right of Kenyans to picket, and we're going to look at that. But first of all, let's listen in to what Dr. Matiang'i had to say, and secondly, a rebuttal by the NASA leaders.
Not allow demonstrations within the central business districts of Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu. That we shall prefer judges, again is the said Mr. Magaya, and we are waiting for the report on the damages caused so as to quantify the value of the claim.
We dare him here and now as NASA. We have a battery of lawyers that are finer and better than any lawyer that Jubilee has on their ranks.
All right, so it looks like it's a battle of the lawyers and who has a greater mind. But Kenyans, of course, at the end of the day, want to remain within the law. I'll start with you, James Mamboleo. And we do know that in Article 37, it gives us, as Kenyans, a right to picket, to demonstrate and to have our voice heard. Article 24, on the other hand, has the limitations. Your comments so far on the two? We have Dr. Matiang'i saying it's not going to happen. We have NASA saying it is going to happen.
Thanks, Michael, for having me. Article 37 guarantees the right of every Kenyan to demonstrate, to picket, and to otherwise express outrage over certain public action from any institution, be it government or any other person. So the important thing there is, for me, I see a government that is probably losing the thread, because what is very important is, have these demonstrations reached that point where we should take the drastic action of supplanting the right completely? And I think the answer is no. So whereas it is incumbent upon demonstrators, of course, to make sure they operate within the confines of the Constitution, looking at the provisions of Article 24, which limits their right vis-a-vis other rights of other Kenyans. What I think would be better for Dr. Matiang'i and the government is to make sure that they observe the provisions of Section 5 of the Public Order Act, which requires the police to guide these demonstrations, make sure they protect property, make sure they protect the demonstrators as well. I don't think Kenya has reached that point where the government at this point needs to clamp down on demonstrators. On that one, I wouldn't agree. But on the other hand, I think it is important that the NASA demonstrators also carry out their business within the confines of the law. They should not be armed, they should not throw stones at motorists, they should not destroy property, and they should make it easier for the police to assist them demonstrate so that they make their point within the confines of the law.
All right, before I come to Dr. Mohwana, you mentioned that you don't feel it is time to clamp down. However, just like you've mentioned and you've seen the videos and pictures of destruction, of theft, of basically things that have gone wanton. The question is, at what point then do you feel would be reasonable for the government to say we are clamping down on this because now it has gone over and above what is expected?
Well, looking at what happened, for instance, in Kisumu, you would understand where the government is coming from. However, the exercise of such fundamental freedoms like to demonstrate and to picket is such a thing which the government and every person should protect with a lot of jealousy. And we shouldn't be too quick to say now we cannot allow anybody to demonstrate any longer because probably last week somebody destroyed property and so on and so forth. I think what needs to be done is the authorities, especially the police, need to always be at standby to make sure that these demonstrations are going well. So that at that point when they think things are getting out of hand is when they should take those steps. Otherwise, if the government wholesomely bans these demonstrations, this might look like, and I'm sure this is what the opposition is really crying for.
But the question is, what is that point? Because you're saying where things go out of hand. What is it that goes out of hand? Because to that businessman who has to close down today because there's going to be demonstrations and they're not sure how it's going to go, to those cars that we saw that were destroyed, maybe for them that is the point. So what is that tipping point?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It should be assessed on a case-to-case basis. We're not going to ban demonstrations wholesomely just because last week demonstrators destroyed property. Now, there is that possibility, and I heard it coming from especially the NASA ranks that they are now telling their supporters to demonstrate within the confines of the law. Now, today, if the demonstrators came out and confined themselves within the law, for instance, the Public Order Act requires the organizer of any demonstrations to be present or to appoint an agent to be present during demonstrations to make sure that the demonstrations are following the routes they have said they are going to follow, and to make sure they do not destroy property. Now, all along, the police should be involved and they should be present. So at that point when these demonstrations probably get infiltrated or these demonstrations break down in something else other than the demonstrations that were intended, the police will make that decision then to scuttle these demonstrations.
Right.
At least that's what I would expect.
Okay.
On the other hand, I expect also the demonstrators to also be vigilant, not to offend the rights of others, to make sure they allow business to go on, so that at least they can also be allowed to continue their demonstrations.
All right. Dr. Mukwana, your opening remarks on where we are, especially in regards to the one Dr. Matiang'i's ban and NASA's word that they will go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. You know, Michael, personally, I'm beginning to feel very tired about these acts from the politicians. We have said it a couple of times in this show, and I have said that NASA ought to take responsibility for the participation of the citizenry in this picketing. Because when you call out the citizenry to picket, you must then take responsibility to the extent that you ought to have your own security marshals, you ought to demarcate the routes that they will take, and you ought to ensure that just as they begin peacefully, as much as possible they end peacefully. That NASA cannot run away from, and I have said they must take responsibility. Having said that, however, that must not then be taken to mean that the ultimate and overall responsibility of ensuring the safety and security of Wananchi's property lies with NASA. Because they do not have that monopoly of force, they do not have the instruments that are indeed supposed to be used. And that is where now the police come in. That the purpose why they are being notified in advance is to ensure that just like the NASA marshals are helping and assisting the police, ensuring that the organization is secure, the police have to work in liaison with the NASA organizers to make sure that the proceedings are peaceful, because the routes are demarcated, Michael.
Or they're supposed to be.
They're supposed to be. Thank you. At least they're supposed to be demarcated.
Correct.
And we are supposed to, the police know that they'll start from Uhuru Park, they'll go to Uhuru Highway Roundabout, and so forth and so forth.
Kenyatta Avenue, Moi Avenue.
Precisely. However, what is appearing now, really, Michael, is not because there is no law that can be used to ensure that these incidents of looting don't happen. What is happening is that Each side is taking advantage of the law and their current positions to flex their muscles so that they can be able to achieve their objectives. Let me tell you why. Honorable Matiang'i is very right in saying that there will be the most reckless government to sit back and watch people's property looted. He's very right on that one. No government can do that. But he, in the same breath, he's so wrong when he says that I'm therefore banning demos in the city because of that. You cannot do a wrong because a wrong has been committed. What Matiang'i ought to have said, that from now henceforth, anybody caught doing exactly what they've been doing ought to be arrested. And the police have the capacity of infiltrating these demonstrators in plain clothes, and they do a very good job, in plain clothes, and others in uniform. So that those among demonstrators, if be they crooks who have infiltrated the way Honorable Tangula alludes, or be they the same NASA supporters who have decided to take advantage of the demos to pillage other people's property, they should be nabbed. And the proper law that they'll be subjected to is a law that deals with criminal liability in this country. It is there.
It is there.
It is there. And the penal code. So that the Constitution allows us to go to the streets. Yes. The same Constitution says, hey, there is a limitation. Yes. In the process, have you gone beyond the limitation? Yes, you've gone beyond it. What happens? You are arrested and you are charged. You cannot ban street demonstrations. And that is where Honorable Matiang'i goes wrong. But look, Michael, as I've said, is it not a question of everything being politicized? Honorable Matiang'i is simply using that opportunity to score a goal against the opponents. Isn't he the same man who is not supposed to campaign for Jubilee?
For Jubilee.
But he's campaigning, yet he is a cabinet secretary. So from one mouth, we cannot allow law to be defied. From the other side, you are campaigning, yet the law says you're a civil servant.
Okay. Mambo Leo, one of the things that maybe you would like, and as a country, we're getting to a point where it seems we're losing reason. And the reason why we are losing reason is anchored on the fact that I have my rights. Yes. But our rights are not there to infringe on others' rights. At what point does reason kick in? Because if you look at it from Dr. Matiang'i's angle, there are those who will support, and especially those who feel that they're not necessarily party to what is going on and would like to go on with their normal lives and businesses as usual. From the supporters, because I don't want to just say it's NASA, but there are those who possibly are in support of reforms and even the protests to a point where this country needs to have that change. At what point do we balance and have reason kick in from both ends?
Very important question. Michael, we are moving, we are hurtling in the wrong directions too quickly. I think on the one side, I see a government that is extremely pressed to dispense with its responsibilities of protecting the citizens is becoming more and more difficult every day because of the nature that things are taking. However, I think that the government needs to rise above the fray and ensure total, absolute protection of the freedoms and rights guaranteed in the Constitution. Now, this is what is, for me, extremely important. First and foremost, this government has a responsibility to protect all citizens, including the demonstrators and picketers. And while that happens, it also has the dual responsibility of making sure it protects the other people who are going about their businesses in the central business districts or in any other place where this picketing or demonstrations are taking place. Now, the Public Order Act at Section 5 gives a raft of requirements that demonstrators have to meet before it can be called a demonstration within the law. The organizer needs to give his name and contact address. The organizer needs to be present during the entire demonstration. The organizer needs to make sure he has appointed marshals to ensure everybody demonstrating is following the route and doing this demonstration in accordance with the law. Now, this happens everywhere across the world. There are many other countries in which demonstrations happen. Property is not looted. Nobody pillages anybody's property or smashes anybody's window screen or something like that. Now, what we are seeing here is an opportunistic situation in which many demonstrators either fall out of law and order and decide to carry out something completely different other than the demonstration they went in. Now, I think reason needs to kick in at this point, that both the government and the opposition need to understand that both of them are operating within a law which allows them, the first one, to protect the rights of everybody else, and the second one, to carry out its demonstrations within the law. So a delicate balance needs to be struck. As we go out to demonstrate, let us not offend the people with which we want to have a conversation. Because what is a demonstration really? A demonstration is a way of bringing outrage into the public domain so that this discussion can be heard more broadly by the wider public. And so if you come out into the public and offend the same public that you intend to get into the conversation, then you're actually getting out of hand. But on the other hand, the government needs to know that it is extremely important to safeguard the fundamental freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution. That's why I said, for me, it is supposed to be assessed on a case-to-case basis. Once the police begin to notice that these demonstrations are becoming riotous, that they are starting to break the law, then they have the instrumentation to actually whittle down or break or scuttle these demonstrations. And at that point is when that particular force needs to be used. But otherwise, we cannot at all seek at this point to ban demonstrations wholesome. And I understand, of course, that we are also operating within a political environment, that the government is, let's say the president is a candidate in an election, and at the same time, the president is also the president and head of state and head of government of this country. And within that particular context, it is very difficult sometimes for even Kenyans to distinguish between the president, the candidate in the election, and then the president, the head of government, who's supposed to protect everybody else. So what the government needs to do, especially the president, is to make sure that he doesn't come out as being extremely bullish against the people who might probably not support him in this election, but at the same time, reach out and make sure that it's looking like his government protects everyone. But of course, also as a basic minimum, the government should not allow anyone to loot property, to demonstrate in a way that offends the Constitution and the law.
All right, Dr. Mukwana, your thoughts on are we losing the reason as a country? We've become so entrenched in laws, and that's why the law is there, and it's everybody's constitutional right. But is there a point where reason is supposed to kick in?
Long time ago, we said it in our previous shows, reason ought to have set in from the onset. And more than reason, Michael, there is the humility and the goodwill that need to accompany the reasoning of our leaders. Recently, one bishop on Citizen TV talked about the concept of humility for our leaders. That if you are humble, if you have this humility as a virtue, you will be able to reason and listen to what the opponent is saying. And that way, whatever it is that you decide as head of state or as head of opposition will have the interest of the country at large with you, even as you move forward. What we don't have in this country amongst the leaders is humility. Everybody just thumbs. What we don't have is respect for each other. Everybody is insulting the other. And this, Michael, has cascaded downwards to the citizenry. And that is why you see our own elected members are clobbering each other in Parliament in front of our children's eyes and everybody. So the problem, Michael, in this country is that our leaders have no room for values that are very important in pushing the society forward. The moment those values escaped through the windows of this nation, that is when the rain started beating us. And do not be surprised, Michael, that the worst is yet to come. Because from what you're seeing here, for some of us who have lived in this country longer, it is actually a replay of what happened in the 80s and 90s. When I hear Dr. Matiang'i talk the way he talks, he actually reminds me of the late Hezekiah Yugi, Okiki Amayo, of them days, J.J. Kamudo. We don't have a shortage of examples. And from here, today, God forbid, Michael will not be surprised if what we'll witness in these demonstrations will become so nasty and so fatalistic. The reason, Michael, is that our leaders lost respect for each other.
For each other. All right, so that's where we are when it comes to the protest. But now, this week, NASA leader Raila Odinga withdrew from the presidential race, saying the move will allow the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to implement reforms that will allow credible election. Let's listen into what he had to say.
Considering the interests of the people of Kenya, the region and the world at large, we believe that all will be best served by NASA vacating its presidential candidature in the election scheduled for 26th October this 2017. IEBC has stonewalled meaningful deliberations on the necessary reforms to ensure that the elections of 26th of October are free and fair.
It is his democratic right not to participate. Sindio. We tell him also it is the people's right to participate in an election to choose their leader. So whether you are there or not, we are proceeding to the people who have the sovereign right to elect the leader of their choice.
Right, so that's what the leaders have to say. Again, I come to you, Dr. Mukhwana, on your comments on the fact that chest thumping, both of them, when they speak, they sound reasonable. That the people do have the right, according to Uhuru Kenyatta. But Raila also saying that I'm not happy to go into an election where I feel it is not a level playing ground. Where does that leave us now, legally speaking?
Each time we talk about legally speaking, Michael, I'm becoming reluctant because our viewers are getting tired by this thing about laws and lawyers and interpretations. So much so that they now are losing respect for some of us lawyers because they think that we are now categorized into two. You're either pro-NASA or you're either pro-Jubilee. And every interpretation that we make is seen in that light. And that's not good for this country, nor for the legal profession. Indeed, under the LSK Act Section 4, we have a duty to the public to educate them, okay? Not to eradicate them from the knowledge that we have. Legally speaking, if I may use that term.
As much as you're reluctant to use it.
Reluctantly so, Michael. Where we stand now, I do not think the law will help us much. Because any law is just as good as the people charged with its implementation. You see, the Constitution was enacted in the hope that the implementers of this Constitution will be men and women of goodwill. What happens if the Constitution is good, the laws are good, but the men and women who are charged with implementing it don't have goodwill for country and among themselves? So now that Honorable Raila has withdrawn, never mind about the arguments. I've heard Honorable Matangi say things and others. You see, the legal argument has been this, that because the Constitution, because the Election Act says you must fill Form 24A so that you are deemed to have officially, legally, and procedurally withdrawn, Raila therefore has not withdrawn. Technically, that is right. But they are not telling us, the same fellows are not telling us, that that same regulation requirement says that that withdrawal ought to be within 3 days from the date of nomination. So you see, Michael, they choose one side that propagates their position, and these that may propagate the other position, they leave, and vice versa. This game is across the board. So legally where you're standing, come 26th October, there will be an election. That is for sure, because the Supreme Court said so, and that is what the Constitution says. Never mind that there are other things which the Supreme Court said which have not been implemented. But for the election, there will be.
There will be an election.
In whatever format, in whatever style.
So from a legal perspective, the fact that he did not withdraw within the 3 days, does that mean he ideally now cannot withdraw?
No, that argument is neither here nor here, neither there or here. That's why I don't want to dwell in it. Because again, this is not an election proper. This is an election that is a product of an order of court. So even when it comes to the issue of nominations, we don't have fresh nominations because ordinarily nominations ought to be conducted afresh if it was elected. So don't even dwell there. Don't even waste the viewer's time to say whether he ought to be on the ballot or not. Because what is there is not even a withdrawal. What Raila has done is to boycott the election. But because it is politics, his guys have gone ahead and quoted Article 138(8)(b). Michael, Article 138(8)(b), and if you give me a minute, I need to read it because, as I said, we are now not even being believed when we say these things on air.
Right.
138(8)(b) says this, Michael. 138(8)(b), among others, it has A, it has B, it has C. A presidential election shall be cancelled and a new election held if B, a candidate for an election as president or deputy president dies on or before the scheduled election. So this particular particular sub-article B, talks about if a candidate dies.
Right.
But this is actually what the NASA guys quoted and said, based on this, we ought to have fresh nominations, we ought to go to a fresh election. So don't waste the viewers' time going to this legal jargon. It's a waste of our viewers' time. What our viewers must understand, that what is at play here is politics. And any time a section of the law is quoted, it is quoted only to the extent that it can further the goal of the quota of that particular legislation.
The objective that they want to achieve at that point in time. Mamboleo, your thoughts on Raila's withdrawal? Boycott, rather.
It's a big issue. However, I think the High Court ruling on Wednesday by Justice Mativo kind of knocked the winds out of the sails of Raila Odinga. There are many things that I agree with him, but I don't agree with him on this question of withdrawal from the presidential race. Raila Odinga went to the Supreme Court and requested the Supreme Court to look at the August 8th presidential election. The Supreme Court went through the motions and returned a decision that that election was not performed or conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the law, and then ordered that a fresh election be held within 60 days in accordance with Article 140 of the Constitution. So it really beats total reason that after you have gone through all those motions and given a chance again to have a bite at the cherry a second time, you can come back and tell Kenyans, hey, gentlemen and ladies, I'm not going to participate. On that particular aspect, I don't agree with him. But how did we get here in the first place? In 2013, the Supreme Court, by invitation, I think through the Attorney General, made some comments in respect to what a fresh election under Article 140 would mean. It said that once the Supreme Court nullifies the election, then the anticipated fresh election is only going to be between the president-elect and the petitioner number 2 or any other person who contested that election in the petition, which interpretation I think for me was totally wrong. So the High Court has set the record straight that the fresh election anticipated under Article 140 is a totally fresh election, and for which even new candidates would actually be invited to participate were it not for the fact that there is no time to get these people to conduct nominations. So one thing that is extremely important for us as Kenyans is to know that we should not allow ourselves to get out of the constitutionally regulated realm that we are in within the 60 days and then go into a constitutional vacuum in which we do not know clearly how we should proceed beyond the 60 days. That election should be held. And for me, if Raila chooses to participate or he doesn't participate, that is neither here nor there. I don't think we should give too much premium on whether he signed Form 24A or he didn't. What we should do is, if I say very clearly I don't want to participate in an election,
you cannot be forced.
Then I should not be forced to participate in that election. In fact, all he needs today to do is just come out on national television and say, I am not going to participate in this election.
Which he has already done.
Which he has already done. So I think IEBC and any other stakeholder, it should not belabor that particular point. Let them ask or request these other candidates who are candidates in the August 8th election, whether they want to participate, get a list of those who want to participate, and once that happens, put those people on the ballot, and we have a presidential election on 26th. Now, that doesn't, of course, deal with the question that, politically speaking, as a nation, we need to understand what the ramifications of a huge section of the population not participating in the election means. And this is something that we should deal with, of course, as we go along. And I'm sure once the election comes and goes, there is a huge responsibility that now lies on whoever president gets elected to start getting this country into a conversation in which some of these things can be ironed out. The problems that we have at IEBC might not be solved between now and 26th. The problems that we have in the national discourse about generally how we want to take this country forward cannot be solved between now and 26th so that we have an election. Now, if we stuck behind to solve these problems before we can have an election, we are going to tread into a scenario in which we are not able to contain probably the problems that we might arise. So for me, let's go to an election 26th. Let's get whoever candidates will be available to participate. Once the new president is elected, then after that, that president bears a huge responsibility to get the nation talking on various reforms that will bring the country together.
All right, and of course, one may say that a spanner was thrown into the works this week when Third Way Alliance presidential candidate Dr. Ekuru Aukot got a big win after the High Court ruled that he should be included in the repeat election. The court further directed IEBC to amend the Gazette notice and include Aukot as a candidate. In Justice Motivo's ruling, all candidates who participated in the nullified presidential election qualify to run for fresh polls. Let's listen in.
And hereby issued compelling the first and second respondents to immediately issue a fresh Gazette notice and or amend the Gazette notice dated 5th September 16 by way of a corrigendum to include the petitioner herein as a presidential candidate for the
We want to relish this moment, enjoy the opportunity being given, and definitely confirm to Kenyans that we shall be in that ballot as it's been ordered by the High Court.
All right, Dr. Mkhwana, where does this now send us? Because with Raila's withdrawal earlier in the week, it was generally felt that we cannot have elections at all. But now with Dr. Aukot and possibly all the other candidates who are there in the other ballot, hoping to be on the ballot this time or being requested to declare whether they're going to be on or not.
You know, Michael, the reason why I'm saying we really are engaging not in a very useful debate at times is because even before Aukot was coming in, there was going to be an election. This discussion as to whether the election could not have been there because of Raila or not, I have said that even the head of state himself, when he said, remember in Mombasa, he said that whether he's not in or out, we will proceed to do the election. But then again, when Aukot is allowed to come in, he says, now we can go ahead with the election because now we have Aukot. So it is a misnomer of sorts. It's really mixing people up. For me, as I've said, Raila's is not a withdrawal, it's a boycott. And what we ought to be addressing ourselves to is not whether there will be an election. What we should be addressing ourselves to is, in the current state of affairs in our country, should an election go on or should there be a national dialogue as it has been proposed by the Catholic bishops and the court to fraternity, so that these issues that are resolved now as opposed to being resolved after the election, which we do not know which direction it will take. And this is the reasons. Why are we saying there must be an election? Because that is what the Constitution says, and most importantly, because that is what the Supreme Court mandated. But you know, to be fair to the other side, is that the only thing that the Supreme Court ruled about? There are other important issues that the Supreme Court ruled about, which are now being trashed beneath the carpet and saying, let's just go and have it, we sort it after. I said on this show, I do not know whether you're hosting, it was your colleague who was hosting, that you do not plunge yourself headlong into a river whose depth you do not know how far it is. What we are now trying to do is to hurtle towards a crisis and say, let's just go there Once we have something of sorts, we can sort out what there is after. That is a terrain you don't want to venture into. For me, I still echo what the Catholic bishops have said, and I must thank them. I've had an opportunity to share my thoughts with them. I must thank them for having come out at this time. I wish they had come out earlier. Michael, the right thing to do now is to dialogue as a nation, have all the stakeholders. This country is not for Raila and Uhuru alone, for God's sake.
Correct.
Let us dialogue. What is so big? 26th will come and go. But in what form, style, and condition will it come?
Will it leave us?
Remember, the article under which this election is proceeding demands that there shall be an election in each of the 290 constituencies. Suppose in one constituency, one where Raila has ardent support, for whatever reasons, whether you bring GSU, whether you bring KDF, for whatever reason, there is no election that goes on.
All right, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought right there because we need to take a break and release KTN home. And right here on Morning Express, well, we are looking at analysis of the week that has been. Remember, we're going to be taking your calls shortly. But for now, we'd like to release KTN home for Life and Style to begin. And those of us on KTN home will be right back with this discussion. Don't go away.